O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Once again this year, we are observing the season of creation in the month of September. This is a relatively recent creative variation in what we call the liturgical year, the liturgical calendar. Generally, the liturgical calendar, or the Christian year, is based upon the life of Christ. The 4 weeks of Advent anticipate the coming of the Messiah, and then the 12 days of Christmas celebrate his birth. Epiphany recalls the visit of the Magi and the baptism of Jesus and the ever emanating light of Christ going out to bring God's love and grace to all the world. During the 6 weeks of Lent, we journey with Jesus to the cross. Then, beginning on Easter Sunday, we celebrate the resurrection for 50 days. And this culminates on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes with wind and fire to energize and bring new birth to this new community called the church. And thus we have told just about the whole story, and we've done it in about 6 months out of the year. We've got a whole another 6 months before we get back to Advent again. So this 6 months between major Christian festivals, from June to December, creates space for some creativity. And in that space, the season of creation is a grassroots liturgical movement that has gained momentum throughout the global church, which we here at Trinity have been observing since 2010. The liturgical year is based upon the life of Christ. Creation is also an event in the life of Christ. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. The pre-existent Christ, the redeeming grace of God, was woven into creation from the beginning. So celebrating a season of creation certainly makes sense theologically. But have you noticed that the earth itself is crying out in distress? Many Christians around the globe have indeed felt called to recognize and respond to this greatest crisis of our time. And that also is an impetus for celebrating the season of creation. It invites us to celebrate the goodness of creation with a sense of awe, and it inspires us to act as advocates for and healers to the earth itself. This first Sunday of creation is Ocean Sunday. How blessed we are to live near the sea. The ocean is awesome. We have ocean stories, ocean inspirations, ocean fears. The sightings of dolphins and whales fascinate us. Starfish and tide pool communities hold our attention and our gaze. The motion of the waves is mesmerizing, sometimes comforting, sometimes overpowering and frightful. Our scriptures come to us from a people who experienced the ocean as chaotic and fearful. The Hebrew people were not a seafaring folk. It is therefore all the more dramatic when God challenges Job's wisdom by questioning him about the ocean. And when Jesus challenges the fishermen to throw their nets into the deep. Oh, yes, it was a lake, but nevertheless, lake where great storms would come, and people were fearful of the water. The ocean is the playground of Leviathan. It is the place that Jonah went to try and escape God's presence, only to find that God's presence was even there in the ocean and to find himself in the belly of a great fish. The scriptures certainly attest to the power of the ocean, and the Hebrew poets and the theologians praised God by affirming that God's power was even over the ocean, which they had a hard time imagining. Yet they affirmed. Well, that's ancient literature, but much about the ocean is still a mystery to us. We've only explored about 5% of the ocean's floor, an ocean which covers 2/3 of the Earth's surface. There's a big distance in time and place between us and Job. But God could still challenge us, could still ask us, much as he challenged Job, have you walked in the ocean and seen what it holds? Have you explored the deep caves that are there? Have you counted all that lives beneath the waves? We have seen a little more than Job, but there's a whole lot that is beyond us. In 1979, Sylvia Earle was the first person to descend in a pressurized suit and walk on the ocean floor at 1,250 feet deep. She was the first person to do that without having a tether to the surface. She had a short line that went to a little companion submarine, and she rode down on the nose of that submarine and then walked off it. She shared what she saw. I experienced going through the sunlit area into what is generally known as the twilight zone, where sunlight fades and darkness begins to take over. It's like the deepest twilight or the earliest dawn. You can see shapes, but not really distinct forms, and this begins at about 500 feet. By the time you get down to 600 feet, it's really, really dark, like a starlit night. 1,000 feet, it is truly dark, but still enough light penetrates clear ocean water in the middle of the day that I could see shapes. Before me was the flash and sparkle and glow of bioluminescent creatures. There were corals that just grow in a single stretch, no branches, like great bed springs springing up from the ocean floor. And when I touched them, little rings of blue fire pulsed all the way down to the base of these spiraling creatures. Beautiful creatures, taller than I. Sylvia Earle walked on the ocean for 2.5 hours, about as much time as Buzz Aldrin and Aldrin and Armstrong spent walking on the surface of the moon. But whereas the moon was lifeless, the ocean at 1,250 feet deep is full of life. Everywhere you looked, she said, there were little fish with lights down the side. Of course, the corals themselves were alive. There were little burrows of creatures that were dwelling in the sediments on the seafloor. The water itself is like minestrone, except all the little bits are alive. Sylvia Earle wrote a book called Sea Change, A Message of the Oceans. And in it she says, the living ocean drives planetary chemistry. It governs climate and weather, and otherwise provides the cornerstone of the life support system for all the creatures on our planet. from deep sea starfish to desert sagebrush. That's why the ocean matters. If the sea is sick, we'll feel it. If it dies, we die. Our future and the state of the oceans are one. Every breath we take is linked to the sea. When Sylvia Earle thinks about our relationship to the ocean, she remembers the simple lessons that she learned from her parents. Her mother told her to always leave things better, or at least just as good as they were found. And her father, noticing her early scientific interest to take things apart and see how they worked, reminded her that she needed to be able to put them back together again and to be sure not to lose any parts. With regards to our planet, we are certainly good at taking things apart, but not so good at putting things back together, and we seem to have lost a lot of the pieces. The ancient scriptural texts affirm what the science of our day tells us, that our lives are bound together with the whole of creation. The ocean, the land, the sky, and all of God's living creatures are blessings to be celebrated and living ecosystems of which to be mindful. We are dependent beings, and the way we live affects the whole. Thus, it is a matter of faithfulness to God's call that we pay attention to the ways in which we may be and the ways in which we indeed are harming the sea. One of the things we've learned since the time of Job is that the ocean is not a place from which we can take as much as we want, assuming that there will always be a limitless supply. Our pollution has destroyed coral reefs. We can only guess the long-term consequences. Sylvia Earle notes that there's an amazing array of life in the ocean, a seemingly infinite variety of distinctness. There are other intelligent creatures out there, whales and dolphins and elephants and fish. Some of them are really smart, but they don't know what we know. We have this power not only to explore, but we can go back in time. We can anticipate far into the future. We can plot a course for ourselves with wisdom and intelligence. And the trick is, okay, Homo sapiens, the smart ones, the wise ones, let's take advantage of that capacity. Let's put that into action and not just be like the bacteria on a dish that consume everything until they die. We don't have to do that. When we go out to Montaña de Oro State Park and walk along the bluffs, look out at the sea, we revel in the power and the beauty. Let us be aware of our interdependence. Let us be mindful of the ways that the ocean suffers due to human greed. That wisdom is preserved for us in a Native American tale. It's amazing how much of our modern day ecological struggle is informed by the wisdom of ancient and indigenous people. There's a Native American legend from the Northwest about the origin of Puget Sound and the Cascade Mountain Range. In 1951, Washington Native American Clarence Pickerel recorded this story, which he first heard from his great-grandmother. One time, when the world was young, and the land east of where the Cascade Mountains now stand was dry, it became very dry. This was the early days, as the legend goes, before the rains came, and in the beginning of the world, the moisture just came up from the ground. But for some reason, it had stopped coming. Plants and trees withered and died. There were no roots and no berries for food. The water in the streams became so low that the salmon could no longer live there. The ancient people were hungry. At last, they sent a group of people westward to ask the ocean for water. Our land is drying up, they told old ocean. Send us water, lest we starve and die. I will send you, the ocean said, my sons and daughters, and they will give you water. Ocean's sons and daughters were clouds and rain. They went home with the messengers from the dry country, and soon there was plenty of moisture. Plants and trees became green and grew again. Streams flowed with water, and many fish lived in them again. Roots and berries grew everywhere. There was plenty to eat. But the people were not satisfied with just plenty. They wanted more. They wanted to be sure that they would always have water. So they dug great pits and they asked clouds and rain to fill them. Clouds and rain stayed away from their father ocean for a long time. So long that ocean became lonely. And after many moons, he sent messengers to ask that his sons and daughters be allowed to come home. Let the children return home, he sent word to the ancient people. You have enough water for the present, and I will see that you have enough again in the future. But the people wanted to control the clouds and the rain. They wanted to have it always there at their beck and call, and they refused to let it go. The ocean went to the Great Spirit and told his troubles. Punish the people for their evil ways, prayed the ocean. Punish them for always wanting more and more. The Great Spirit heard his prayer. He leaned down from the sky and scooped up a great amount of earth and made the Cascade Mountains as a wall between the ocean and the land to the east. The long and deep hole left where the earth had been, ocean soon filled, and that is what is today called Puget Sound. The people east of the mountains are still punished for their selfishness and greed. Ocean sends so little moisture over the Cascade Range that they do not have the plants that grow along the coast. It is not so lush there. But they still have their pits that the grandfathers dug, and they are known as Lake Chelan and the lakes south and east of it. And ocean forever grieves in memory of this story for his sons and daughters who did not come home. All day, night, and all day long, the beach, he calls them and sings his mournful song as the waves beat against the shore. Come home. Come home. Come home. The ocean calls for its children, cloud and rain, to come home again. And indeed, the rain waters flow through the lakes and the rivers, nourishing the earth on that long journey, which eventually takes them back to the ocean, where they can be lifted up into the clouds again, and the whole cycle goes over and over again. And the ocean and the lakes and the rivers become the circulatory system of this living thing that we call the earth. As God's children, we are also being called continually to come home. God is our home, and God has provided us a home. And like a good parent, God reminds us that wherever in this expansive universe of home that we find, in whatever place we find ourselves, we should always leave things as good or better than we found them. We should try and put things back together and not lose any of the parts. O Lord,